all of that. I feel very honored that Rev Dan asked me to speak here today while her and Victor are on a much-deserved vacation in Colorado. And as some of you know already, this topic, the topic of honoring myself, is something that I've done a lot of personal work around the past few years and something I've done a lot of study of. And I could honestly talk for hours about it. So U-Nite's going to be over about 9:30. Make yourself really comfortable. It'll be here a while. I'm fairly new to Unity, having only been here for the past year. However, Unity teachings and the supportive friendships that I've found here have been integral to my journey from self-neglect to self-respect. A tremendous amount of core healing has happened here. I often talk about the period in my life when I no longer wanted to live. 3 years ago today, I was in the middle of this period which lasted for weeks. I wanted to end my life, and I almost did. Why? At the time, my marriage was failing. I had relapsed in one of my addictions. My job at the time did not pay enough to pay all of the bills and feed us at the same time, and my nearest family member and closest supportive friend lived 700 miles away. We had just moved here to Kansas City from Houston a couple months before that. I really felt alone, and for all intents and purposes, I was alone. I hadn't made any friends here yet. All of that was really, really hard, and none of it took me to the place where I wanted to end my life. So if all of that stuff didn't, what did? I want to start today by talking about what honoring thyself is not. I learned early in life that in order to be safe, I needed to yield my own values and desires to the wants and needs of others. Sacrificing my own values and even my own personality to be who and what anyone wanted me to be was not only dishonoring, it was disowning. I manipulated others and tried to change the outcomes of situations so that I benefited. I often felt powerful and at the same time enslaved. Over time, I completely lost myself and no longer knew who I was. I was separated from my true being, my divine nature. I also learned that my value and worth was not based on who I was, but on what I did. Pia Melody refers to this as being a human doing rather than a human being. The standard of perfection was set for me by my family and community, and I later adopted that standard and set it for myself. Perfectionism is an imaginary standard of perfection against which a person measures his or her worth in reality. It's like imagining I could fly and basing my own worth on whether or not I could. And even if I could, I was still a failure in my eyes because I didn't fly just right. It wasn't perfect. Perfectionism set the bar of good enough so impossibly high that I failed before I even started. A consequence of my mask, sacrificing my personality, and perfectionism was to beat myself up all the time in my thoughts and in my words. I would defeat myself in my mind before I even tried something. The ways I would think about myself and talk about myself were terrible. Sean Stevenson is a therapist with many, many physical challenges, and he said in a TED Talk, "Never believe a prediction that doesn't empower you." I made self-defeating predictions constantly, and unsurprisingly, they became self-fulfilling prophecies. Even self-deprecating humor was damaging. Recently, I had a conversation with a coworker of mine and kind of slipped into some of that negative self-talk and kind of disguised it as joking. And I felt a pang of pain from that. Oh, I didn't realize how much it affects. Of course I'm going to have a low view of myself when my own language is so self-defeating. Practicing these behaviors meant believing that there was nothing bigger than myself and that I was in control. Giving myself away, losing my identity, comparing my false self against impossible standards, and being my own worst enemy are what took me to the bottom. It wasn't the external circumstances of my life, it was the dishonor and self-neglect that did. So then, if dishonoring myself, if all of that is dishonoring myself, what is honoring myself? And if you thought, well, doing the opposite of all those things, you'd be right. Class dismissed. I'll see you on the rest of it. As I look back over my journey for this talk, I noticed a pattern developing and repeating itself over and over. A pattern that led me toward healing, and I want to share that with you tonight. Before I do, I read a story recently that I found interesting. In 1957, a group of Thai monks were informed that there was going to be a new port and a new highway built and that they needed to relocate their shrine. The shrine in question was a huge clay Buddha statue. So they made the arrangements and called in the construction crews and brought in the cranes, and they began to lift and move this humongous shrine. And one of the monks noticed as they were trying to lift it that it began to crack. In a panic, they put it back down gently and covered it for the night so that they could figure out what to do. That night, the monk went to the shrine and just inspected it, had a flashlight, and was examining the damage and shining it over the cracks. And he shined it over one crack and noticed a flash from inside. He shined it back over and it flashed again. And so he called the other monks, and they began to carefully look into this crack, and they saw something that astonished them. So they grabbed hammers and chisels and chiseled away the clay exterior of a solid gold Buddha. Turns out that Buddha shrine was the responsibility of a group of monks several centuries earlier, and they caught word that the Burmese army was invading, and they were afraid that the army would loot their shrine of their gold Buddha. So they covered it in 8 to 12 inches of clay to disguise it, and made it look just like it was made entirely of clay. There's a point to that. The first step of this pattern that I saw is knowing myself. If I am to honor myself, I have to know what and who it is that I'm honoring. At first, this knowing came about in the form of what I didn't want to be and do. Coming out of denial about behaviors that did not serve me any longer. Addictions, unhealthy habits, behaviors that harmed myself and others, and beliefs that limited me. Once I saw these things, I could not unsee them. Coming out of denial for me was catching my first glimpse, like that sparkle through the crack, of my true self. I saw this glimpse during a period at the bottom of my life when I was given the courage to open up for the first time in my life to a group of strangers at a 12-step meeting. That glimpse was a spark of hope that life could be better, that I could be different than I'd been. And once I saw that spark, I also came to realize the existence of the mask I had been wearing, my outer facade. The monk who saw the sparkle inside realized two things at the same time. One, that there is something inside this Buddha. And two, that this thing I thought was the Buddha is just a facade covering it. Who I thought I was most of my life was not true. The strength and courage to look behind my mask was given to me by God, or if you prefer, Spirit, the universe. and it was given to me a little at a time. I relied on the help of my 12-step community and later this community here at U-Nite. And I began to form a relationship with God, with my higher power, that became my foundation. Prayer and meditation in the silence became powerful methods of going within and learning about myself and my divine nature. Journaling became a foundational practice through which I learned many, many things about myself, and I still continue to journal and learn things today. I read books that were spiritually nourishing and filled with knowledge. I read everything I could get my hands on. These things, prayer, meditation in the silence, journaling, seeking the support of people I trust and love, reading books and material that nourished me, taught me more about myself and my path, energized my muscles to begin to climb out of that pit and gradually take down my mask. I learned very painful things during this process, and I also learned beautiful things. And the more I knew, the more I wanted to know. And the deeper I went, the deeper I wanted to go. I was learning not only about myself, but about God, about spirit, about the world. So what then? So I learned things. But simply knowing was not enough for healing. The next action that I found in this path to honoring myself was acceptance. I can know something and not accept it. Acceptance is an agreement I make with myself to see things as they are, not as I want them to be. Acceptance is surrender. It is the decision to lower my defenses, to put down my shield, and to let Spirit guide me. Yesterday, I was working on this talk, and I felt a lot of anxiety. I went to a park nearby, and I prayed, and I meditated, and the answer came to me. I was not surrendering, and I was trying to control the outcome of this talk. Of course, to make myself look really good. I was making it all about me. This was a humbling revelation for me, of course. So then I had the choice, and I surrendered and opened myself up to the wisdom of Spirit, who gave me the courage to let go of trying to control and let this be what it will be. Sometimes I wasn't ready to accept something fully. During those times, simply accepting its existence was enough for me to grow and move forward. Like my experience yesterday, acceptance meant I stopped trying to control and opened myself up to God, to Spirit. When I had the willingness to do that, I stopped fighting against the current of reality in life. I started moving with it. Nian spoke last week about emptying oneself to make room for God and truth. This is the essence of acceptance. Surrendering and emptying myself to accept God and the realities of life. Acceptance and surrender soften, they loosen, and they lighten the load. So I learned and I accepted. But to continue to grow, I had to soften even more. After knowing and acceptance came love. Love and acceptance go hand in hand with each other. Love is the gentleness and compassion that follows acceptance. Some of the things I learned about myself broke my heart. Accepting these things and surrendering to their existence softened me so that compassion for myself could enter in. Love is tenderness and affection. Love is a warm hug around my heart. To heal, I had to choose to love myself, which meant developing compassion for myself without conditions. I still have the choice every moment of every day whether I'm going to show compassion for myself or whether I'm going to berate myself. Each new situation that arises presents me with this choice. Yesterday, I could have harped on myself for trying to be so self-centered, and in the past I would have. And I chose to love myself and let go of those thoughts instead. It's much better. I have never beaten myself into positive change. Not one time. The changes that have occurred from scolding myself into making them have always been temporary. And, like a child, the punishments and discipline must become increasingly more severe to maintain that change. This resulted in me resenting myself and shutting down. It's not good. But by loving myself instead, I gave myself space, patience, freedom, and a safe environment to grow. Love is patience and appreciation for where I've come and where I am right now, wherever that happens to be, whatever situation I happen to be in. When I look back at the lowest point in my life, I view that painful time and those trials now with gratitude and affection. Because without those trials, I would have never come to know and accept and love myself as I do now. Without the crane and the construction upsetting the balance of those monks in their shrine, that glorious gold Buddha would have been forever covered in clay. I gained knowledge, I accepted this knowledge, and I practiced loving myself. But there was one last thing I needed to do. Protect this. Guard this newness from harm and danger and from being covered up again. Protecting meant creating and setting boundaries. Doing this is honoring to myself because it tells me that I am important to me. That all of this is worth keeping. This past week has been really exciting for me and also really stressful. Lots of change and new experiences, including this. I had no idea how much work doing one of these is. Yeah. I have a new respect for Ian. I had a lot before, but wow. On a couple of occasions, I had invitations to spend time with a couple of groups of friends, and by looking and feeling inside, I realized my stress. I accepted it, and I knew I needed self-care. I knew I needed some solitude. So I gratefully declined these offers. This boundary that I set was a healthy expression of love for myself and others. If I am overextended, I am good to no one, including myself. Boundaries protected me from the outside in and also kept me contained so that I didn't give myself away again. I discovered that boundaries are not walls. I didn't erect a castle around me. That didn't serve me. At the same time, neither did letting everything in or everything out. Healthy boundaries are flexible and they change all the time and are loving action for myself and others. Boundaries gave me the space to bring in information and experiences and weigh them against these new values and beliefs that I was uncovering and decide if it's something that I want to take in and accept or let go. Boundaries allow me to hang on to the things that I am learning, accepting and loving about me. As I examined my journey, these 4 stages formed the pattern of growth and repeated themselves over and over as I grew. Knowing, accepting, surrendering, loving, and protecting. happened over and over again as the layers of the onion of my being were peeled and lifted away. This pattern still happens and will continue to throughout my life. This has been a large part of my path toward honoring myself and self-respect. The more willingness I have to know myself and to go inward, the more willingness I have to know you, the more I accept myself, the more I am able to accept you. The more I love myself, the more love I have to give to you. And when I protect myself with healthy boundaries, I have the space and the freedom inside to do all of those things. To know, to accept, and to love you. In closing, I want to say that each and every one of you are beautiful and shimmering gold, priceless and amazing. The world needs all of you, your true selves. And now in my life, I often ask myself, is there something I'm avoiding knowing about myself? Is there something I've come to know that I haven't yet accepted? Is there something I'm trying to control the outcome of and can surrender? Is there an area of my life where I am trying to beat myself into positive change and I can apply some love instead? Is there a situation in my life that is threatening to harm or cover my true self and needs boundaries? My invitation, my hope for you, is to consider beginning or continuing to know, accept, and love, and protect yourself so that you can uncover that radiant divine in you and stop fighting against life.